A power-sharing deal is agreed to in Sudan, but there's talk of another coup attempt. That has apparently been foiled, but senior military officers have been arrested. So with the deal yet to be implemented, what does this all mean? And can turmoil be contained? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rochelle Carey. For months, people protested in Sudan calling for civilian rule. Several people were killed, hundreds injured. Once again, people are out on the streets, but this time the Sudanese Professionals Association has mobilized its supporters to show that they're committed to a new start. All this after Ethiopia and the African Union worked to bring them all to the negotiating table. Sudan's opposition coalition has met to resolve differences over the formation of a transitional government with the ruling military council. Now they've reached what they're calling a political deal, but the military says it foiled a coup attempt on Wednesday, and the military's chief of staff was among high-ranking officials who were detained. We'll get thoughts on that from our guests in a moment. First, this report from Hiba Morgan in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa.
The results of more than 3 weeks of talks among Sudan's opposition leaders bearing fruit. After numerous meetings between the armed groups of the coalition, known as the Forces for Freedom and Change, and the civilian components of the coalition, the two sides reached a deal.
We are a coalition, a united coalition, but we also think that Sudan's Revolutionary Front, the armed groups coalition, has to be part of this transitional government, so we will have more talks. A representation at all levels will ensure that peace is achieved and can guarantee a stable transitional period.
The two sides also agreed to form a hierarchy to lead the opposition coalition, something it had lacked since it was established in January. It ends tension between the coalition leaders, especially after members signed an initial power-sharing agreement with Sudan's military council in Khartoum last week. That was done without the consent of the armed groups. Some of them have been fighting the government for over 18 years and want some level of representation in a transitional government.
We have agreed to speed up the formation of a civilian transitional government, and the first step is ensuring peace. These talks reached a comprehensive peace agreement with armed groups. We haven't yet decided who will hold positions in a transitional government.
The deal paves way for the opposition to resume talks and sign a final agreement with the military junta. The junta is currently ruling Sudan, after ousting the country's longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir in a military coup in April following months of anti-government protests. On Wednesday, the military council said a coup attempt was made to try to overthrow it.
The military forces were able to uncover the details of the plan and the participants, led by General Hashim Abdul Muttalib Ahmed, the military Joint Chief of Staff, and a number of military officers and senior members of the National Intelligence and Security Service. This is in addition to leaders from the Islamic Movement and the National Congress Party. They have been taken into custody.
As the opposition comes out seemingly united from the talks in Addis Ababa, people in Sudan continue to wait for not only a final deal between the coalition and the military junta, but for the demands for civilian rule and accountability to be met. They say they want all signs of elements of the former government gone to believe that the revolution they started is victorious. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Addis Ababa.
Over to the panel. In Khartoum, Samahir El-Mubarak, spokeswoman for the Sudanese Professionals Association. In Istanbul, Wali Madibo, founder and president of the Sudan Policy Forum, and Yasser Arman, a Sudanese opposition member, joining us from Addis Ababa via Skype. Welcome to all of you. Yasser, I want to start with you. What is it that you know about this political deal, as it's being called, that's been reached with the opposition coalition? What do you know about this?
Well, we are part of the leadership of the Freedom and Change Coalition. That is a coalition that had an immense and a great contribution to the Sudanese revolutions. We were here in Addis Ababa to formulate our position, the negotiation position, and we had wanted to include issues of peace and transformation and to bring democratization and comprehensive peaceful settlement together hands in hands and also to discuss issues of restructuring the Sudanese state and issues of equal citizenship. And those are very issues for a new socio-political cultural dispensation.
When you talk about equal citizenship, talk more about that. What do you mean?
What I mean that, as you know, Sudan is a country that is a diverse country, and this diversity has not been recognized throughout the history of the Sudan since independence of Sudan. And that one of the sources of the instability of the wars that has been going on in Sudan since 1956. And so we need to use this revolution as a mechanism to solve cardinal issues and problems that has faced Sudan. And one of them is the equal citizenship. As Sudan, before the independence of South Sudan, consists of more than 570 different nationalities, tribes, call them, and more than 130 languages. This has not been recognized, and Sudan is part of the Nile Valley civilization, which is black civilization, which has been going on for more than 7,000 years.
Waleed, when you and I have spoken about this whole Sudan situation for the past few weeks, and you had actually mentioned to me before that a key to anything being successful there would be dealing with all of the different parts of the coalition, all of the different ethnicities. Are you encouraged that it seems they've come to some sort of agreement?
Thank you for having me. I think there is hope. If there is, I mean, in the past, previous regimes have tried to superimpose peace settlements, and the more those governments try to superimpose those peace settlements, the more they fail to be the premier of the embodiment of the unity of the people and the custodian of their hopes. So now, now that people are realizing that they need to address the structural issues, the structural roots of the problem, I think we will come closer than ever to reaching for a final peace settlement. However, the way I look at it, it's the peace process itself is poorly designed. The process is poorly designed in the sense that it sifts out perspectives that are sympathetic to the poor, to the internally displaced community, to the marginalized, to the poor, the women in general. And secondly, I think that it constrains the debate within strict limits. That is to say, it limits the debate between northern elites and rebel leaders who, I mean, both groups are trying, I mean, to maintain the status quo, and that won't be helpful at all.
So wait, Waleed,
so
Waleed,
I think
just a minute. So are you saying that these are what you see as still weaknesses in the coalition coming to some sort of agreement? These are deficiencies you still see?
The coalition, are you talking about the forces of freedom and change?
I'm talking about all of the opposite. I'm talking about the opposition, saying the various opposition groups and the rebel groups saying that they've come to a political deal today, so now they can get back to the table with the transitional council. That's what I'm talking about. I'm saying, are you encouraged by that particular development, or do you still see weaknesses in that particular coalition?
No, I think we have we have to help the forces of freedom and change, because I mean, that body, despite of all the disagreements that we might have with it, it has presented a unique opportunity for the Sudanese people to form a coalition, one that is civic and political. However, those young elites, I mean, some of them are mature politicians, but others lack experience. We need to support them. We need to provide them with advice, and they shouldn't take us for a ride. They shouldn't think that they are free of blame. They made mistakes. They ought to recognize those mistakes and try to learn from their mistakes. But for us to weaken them, I think by weakening them, we are weakening our own selves, and we are giving anti-democratic forces a chance to make a move forward.
Samahir, this political deal, how sound is it to you? How necessary is it for this to work, to even get back to the negotiating table, for anything to work?
Well, it's very important that all the parties and all the components of the forces of freedom and change, and the components that have not signed on the Freedom and Change Declaration, are on the same page. Because at this stage, it's a stage of moving forward. And the initial, this agreement in particular is very important because we're talking about the 6 months of peace, after which we are going to start the reconstruction and rebuilding process. And for us to speak of rebel groups and armed rebels, these rebels went out to face the previous regime. And this previous regime, for us to face it right now, we need to lay down arms, and we need to think of the results of this revolution, to start a democratic process that will represent all components of Sudan, the different components, and all resolutions and conflicts to be set in place and to be addressed at its root cause.
Walid, so this announcement that there was an attempted coup and there were arrests made, including the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what do you make of that?
I mean, if you look at the Transitional Military Council, the way it has been handling the situation, it has been dragging its feet. Now it realizes that unless and until it makes a genuine and serious attempt to making a transition to democracy, they will face very dire consequences. So I think from the very beginning it was very obvious that the neighbors of Sudan, mainly Egypt, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Chad, they are keen in having a stable Sudan, but they are not keen in having a strong Sudan, because a strong Sudan is going to raise the issues of energy resources and competition, migration and refugees, and some territorial disputes. But they definitely want a stable Sudan, because they realize that an unstable Sudan will raise issues of transnational terrorism and transnational crime. It's going to raise issues of, I think, profiteering and human trafficking. But in order to handle those issues, they should have looked at a very serious document, because the document that was signed was not a serious document in the sense that it did not address the structural roots of the problem. It did not think of the causes of that has led to the spread of gender-based violence, multi-dimensional poverty, and I think ethnic conflicts and civil wars.
Okay, so clearly there are still quite a few issues that have to be dealt with, but I'm intrigued by what you said about a stable Sudan as opposed to a strong Sudan. Samahir, what role do you think the international community has played in this? Have they been part of the problem or part of the solution?
Well, I believe that after the 3rd of June massacre, the African Union and the Ethiopian mediation have played an important role in bringing the forces of freedom and change and the military council back to the table again, with the lack of trust that has formed between the two components of whether it's the FFC or the TMC, and the fact that this massacre has been a turning point in the revolution made it very difficult for trust to be rebuilt. So I believe the mediation played by the AU and the international community as a whole, represented by the African Union, was important, despite the fact that the condition of dealing with the investigation of the massacre being an important part of the deal. And apart from that, it still has a very important role to play. Apart from just mediating the talks, it has an important role to play in ensuring that they oversee that this deal comes through and that the components, that the concessions that are made are concessions for the sake of the people of Sudan, represented by the FFC, rather than making concessions for the military council over the FFC. I believe that is a very important point to bear in mind by the international units and the international community and the African Union in its mediation.
Of course.
And we've come a long way, but there is still a long way to come. Apart from just sitting for talks and signing the deal, it's important to oversee this process, to oversee that this entire transitional period and this deal actually does come through.
And of course, when I say international community, that actually, I'm grouping a lot of countries together that may not necessarily all have the same interests when it comes to what happens in Sudan. There are competing interests from various countries. Yasser, how difficult does that make it for Sudan to get on stable footing and move forward when there's so many people that are dipping their hands in what's going on and everyone doesn't necessarily want the same thing?
Well, of course, it is a complex situation. Sudan is on the verge of collapse. There is multidimensional issues that need to be resolved. And there is also diverse interests regionally, internationally, that need to bring all these interests into harmony. And there is a need of inclusive process that will include the marginalized areas of Sudan, that will include women, youth, and the issues are complex. There is no black and white answer for that, but the political process should be inclusive. It is among decide their future. It is necessary to get regional and international help, but not on the expense of Sudan. It is the Sudanese people to decide their future and what they want. We need, as of now, a civilian government, a comprehensive, peaceful settlement, and an inclusive process that will take us from war to peace, from the old system into a new system.
Waleed, what has to happen now that the opposition coalition seems to have worked things out among themselves? It's time to get to this next step of figuring out this transitional council, who's going to do what. What is the key to getting past the roadblocks for that part of this agreement?
I think operationally speaking, I mean, I listened to your two respectable guests, and I think there are some issues that are very important. But now, operationally speaking, the country cannot stay for more than 6 months without a prime minister. And the forces of freedom and change ought to have a very transparent process through which they can choose a prime minister. I mean, it's a process. This whole issue of a democratic transition is a process. It's definitely not an event. Sudan has been, I mean, in the last 64 years, it has been dired by a politically and an ideologically oriented process. We need to look more into a policy-oriented reform. This hasn't happened so far. I think what could make the breakthrough is the choice of a prime minister, because that will provide some sort of leadership. It will provide hope for the people. It's not going to be a panacea for all ills, but we cannot stop the whole process until all issues are resolved, knowingly that those issues are very complicated, and they have been there for almost more than 7 decades. In order to deconstruct the racist state, you need a prime minister who understands the situation.
Okay, Wiley, let me bring Samahir in on that. Okay, hold on, just a moment. Samahir, I'm curious. I see you nodding. I'm curious if you agree with that what Walid is saying, that the installation of a prime minister or some type of leader is key to moving forward. Do you agree with that?
I believe that a very important point that he mentioned is that we need to move forward. The country has been at a standstill for the past 7 months, in fact. But the fact that the country is at a standstill for the past 7 months is not just because of what happened in the last month. The most important factor is the resilience of the people of Sudan, and the fact that people want change and they're not willing to go back to life as normal unless this revolution is crowned with a civilian government.
Yasir, I'm going to bring you back into this. This is something Samahir mentioned earlier that is obviously important, and that is that more than 100 people have been killed during these protests. How important is accountability for that in moving forward?
Well, it is very important. Of course, I agree that the Prime Minister and this government, yes, it is an important issue, but it is not magical solutions. Here in Addis Ababa, we agreed to that. We agreed to expedite the process. But accountability is key because Sudan has witnessed impunity and many crimes that has not been punished for. And that encouraged many governments for decades to practice the same. And therefore, what happened in the strike sitting and in the last 30 years, it should be accounted for. It is part of the pillars to build a new society and to move forward and to have a new system and to have a new Sudan that can accommodate all its citizens.
All right, Walid, go ahead, Walid.
May I interject a thought here? I think I do agree with my colleagues here, but I'm just saying that this whole issue of democratic transition requires some sort of a leadership. It cannot be an academic exercise or some sort of a political exercise behind closed doors. We definitely need a governance system, a system by which we can govern the relationship between the legislative branch and the executive branch. That hasn't been agreed upon. Yes, we do need to agree upon a governance system. More importantly, we need to delineate a process by which we can reach for a consensus about the names and the individuals that will be nominated for the legislative branch, the prime ministerial office, and the sovereign council itself. So far, it has been done in a very clandestine manner. I mean, we hear rumors about names. More important than names is identifying the process by which a body will be chosen that is representative of the Sudanese people and is effective. The next step would be the whole issue of accountability, and then alternation in governance is, ATA requirements of governance is alternation in governance, transparency, and accountability.
Okay.
The process so far hasn't been transparent. We don't know how the FFC is going to choose the leaders.
Walid,
we don't know what the opposition proposes. Yes?
We're going to have to leave it there, but your final point is a good point, that there has to be, you're saying there has to be transparency for this to have a chance to succeed. We will call on all of you again for this discussion. We appreciate it very much. Thank you to Samahir El-Mubarak, Walid Madibo, and Yasir Arman. And thank you for watching as well. You can see the program again anytime if you visit our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Michelle Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.